Hey guys, tonight working on the 2007 BMW X3. This is the e83 version, inline six, the N52 engine. When I bought this 4 or 5 months ago, the starter would turn over very, very slowly. And I changed the two ground straps underneath that were really crunchy and gross. I switched them out, probably spent $100 on the two ground straps, and didn't seem to fix the problem. I got in this thing the other day, turned the ignition on, and all it was a clunk and then nothing. So all the lights came on in the dash, and the starter just made a clunk and nothing. And I turned the switch off, turned it back on, nothing. Once again, all the lights in the dash, everything seemed to be great other than no turnover. So when you start doing your research on this, and once again, the information that I'm sharing to you right now is from watching guys on YouTube, and thank you. I wish I had all their names and videos. I should have written them down, but I don't. But thanks to them, it got to, I think, the correct issue here. So the very first thing I thought I had the problem with was the crankshaft positioning sensor. Now, it is extremely hard to get to. In the Bentley manual, it tells you that you can jack this thing up, get underneath, put your wrench with a extension on it, crack that off, and take it out and put a new one in. But the problem is, you get a lot of debris sitting on the engine block, and the last thing you want to do is take that sensor out and then a bunch of debris fall down in the hole. Another thing I had a problem with is that, maybe if this was up on a hoist, it would be easier, or I was a BMW mechanic and you do this, 3 times a month, it wouldn't be a problem. But I could not quite get the right angle to get a hold of the bolt. The bolt for these things are very tiny. For the crankshaft positioning sensor, it's really tiny, it's aluminum. So I ended up pulling the intake off. Okay, so I pulled the intake off, and it wasn't as bad as what I thought. It's just a lot of these vacuum lines and stuff are really tough to get off. And but once you have them off, it gives you a lot of room to be able to work on the crankshaft positioning sensor. So the crankshaft positioning sensor goes underneath here. So the starter goes in here, crankshaft positioner sensor. You can kind of see it. I've got some paper towels stuck in the hole. It goes down in there. The issue is I left the starter in thinking that the whole problem for this no start was the crankshaft positioning sensor. So when I was putting it back in, believe it or not, I broke the stud, the bolt that holds the crankshaft positioning sensor. I broke the stud. Extremely frustrating because you can't see anything because the starter's here. And I didn't want to take the starter out because it was just one extra step, and then having to buy bolts, new bolts for it. So all these aluminum bolts, you got to buy new bolts. You can't reuse them. I was so frustrated that I thought, no, I'll just take out the starter. And I'm glad that I did take out the starter, because I'm almost thinking it was the starter that was causing all my issues. So this is the existing starter. And this is one thing I didn't test because I was so convinced it was the crankshaft positioning sensor, but this thing is shot. It's not supposed to be making that noise. I put it on the bench. This is my little jumper. I put power in here and it won't even go. It just made a bunch of clicking and nothing. It wouldn't spin. So I'm almost positive now that it's this and not the crankshaft positioning sensor. But I just want to share this with you guys so you guys don't make the same mistake as I did here. This is kind of important. When you have all lights on, your battery's good, all the terminals are clean and everything's good, you should have power here all the time, and you can test it. A guy on YouTube did a great job. He just slid the testing light down, touched here. You should have power there all the time, regardless if the key's on or not. And then when the key is in the start position, you should have power to this little part here. If you have power to this part, and this thing doesn't fire, this is the problem. The vehicle that I have here was in North Toronto. It was a family. They probably did a lot of stop-start driving to the grocery store, grandkids, their kids, and a lot of driving somewhere short, stop and start. So I didn't think it could be the starter because it has such low kilometers. But then after kind of thinking about it, yeah, they probably use this a lot, and it's wore out. So that clicking noise does not happen on the new one. So this is the brand new one. Got it from Rock Auto. And nothing. It's completely solid. So I'm thinking now that if I left this in the vehicle before tearing everything apart and tested this would give me 100%, okay, it's this or not. I don't have a scan tool, so I am subject to a little bit of trial and error, but that comes with a cost. So I bought it right from BMW because I thought the crankshaft positioning sensor is such a pain in the butt to get a hold of. I'm just gonna go right to BMW and get the sensor. Well, this thing is $300 Canadian, and I broke it. So when I was tightening this down, because you can't see it because it's underneath the starter, I broke this stud, and it broke off and then broke the actual sensor, or the little clip that holds in the plug, and I was fit to be tied. So I fixed it up. I'm gonna use this one. I'm gonna put it back in and give it a try. Even though the original one, I'm sure it's not the problem, but I spent $300 on it. I'm gonna do it, put it in. So Rock Auto, this is a good brand, the Hella brand. They sell a crankshaft positioning sensor for the BMWs, and I paid $35 for this. And it is the exact same thing. It just doesn't have stamped BMW in it. So this is the exact same sensor for $35, and I paid $300 for that. Luckily, I only paid $170 or $160 Canadian for this, so it's not a big deal. But I could have saved myself $300. Anyways, I didn't go this route right from the start, the $30 sensor, because it was going to be so difficult to change that if I put this cheap one in and it didn't work, I would have been cursing. So I went right to BMW, but you don't have to. You know, you can buy a lot of these before you get to $300 Canadian. So I recommend you do that. Now, another thing that you need to know is that when you change this, you need to change the O-ring and you need the bolt. The new bolt, the aluminum bolt here is very soft. They say, I think it's like 4 or 8 foot-pounds to tighten this down. Don't quote me on that. It says it in the Bentley manual, but just be careful. It just needs to be snug, because I broke the original one into the new one that I bought into the engine block, and I had to unthread it. It was okay. It came out pretty easy. So, but still, just be very careful when you're tightening these down. And once again, the bolts, it's only 2 of them that hold in the starter, and you need to buy 2 new ones. You can't use the existing ones, even though mine were perfectly fine. And like I mentioned before, is that you want to make sure that when you take off this intake, I didn't do this, but make sure all the dirt and debris is off of this. Because as I pulled it away from the head, a lot of dust and dirt fell down into where the valves are. I have to now get my air compressor and hopefully blow that out and get all the debris out of the out where the valves are. It's just so dumb. I was rushing to do this. So I highly recommend, if you're gonna pull the intake off, clean this off first, get all the dirt away so it doesn't go down into the valves. Plus clean off the down here at the bottom of the block, because any dirt and debris that gets into that sensor, so the crankshaft positioning sensor, like I was showing before, goes down in here. You wanna make sure all the dirt and debris is cleaned away before that. So let's just say you do have a code reader and it comes up crankshaft positioning sensor. I don't recommend going up from underneath. It's just too difficult. Take the time, take all this apart. You know, if you're not in a hurry, it's okay. You know, it's a little bit tough. And also, sorry, you also need to replace these rubber gaskets. You get them at Rock Auto for super cheap. Don't go to BMW. They're like $80 or $90 Canadian. And just take your time and put it back together. I'm not a mechanic by any means. I've got a little bit of common sense, and it seems to be working. I am going to take another video whenever this all gets put back together, and hopefully I did solve the problem. and I'm leaning towards the starter and not the crankshaft positioning sensor. Anyways, stay tuned.